Hello again, Netrunner fans, Willingdon here, and today I'm bringing you an exciting game that I recently played, in which I was playing my Chaos Theory Big Rig deck against an incredibly standard RP Glacier deck. The goal of this video is to share some of my thoughts about how I play this runner deck, and we're not going to focus a whole lot on what my opponent's doing as the corporation. Our first decision is going to be whether or not to mulligan. This hand doesn't have Magnum Opus, and while it has some other decent cards, we really want Magnum Opus early in the game, especially against Replicating Perfection. We need to be able to trash their asset economy, and we don't want them to get too far ahead economically because then we won't be able to keep up with just Magnum Opus. I'm going to elect to mulligan this hand. Well, fortunately, our mulligan hand has Magnum Opus, and it also has modded to play it on the first turn. In general, I would always keep a hand that has these two cards, and most of the time I just keep any Opus hand. Our opponent's going to kick things off with a powerful economic play in the form of Celebrity Gift. It's absolutely essential that we use the information that we get from this gift, and not just let them get a bunch of free credits and forget everything they just showed us. Pretty good hand for our opponent here. He's got 3 different ice that are all 3 different types, and he has an architect to defend R&D. If he puts an ice on R&D, we can basically be guaranteed that that is the architect, because architect really shines on R&D and it's kind of bad on the other servers. So I would expect that if he defends HQ, we're going to see an end the run piece of ice, and if he defends R&D, we're going to see the architect. Our opponent's going to opt to defend HQ, probably worried about Siphon or a bunch of other nonsense. Definitely not a bad play for him. We really need to get into R&D this turn since our opponent left it totally undefended, but I want to install the Magnum Opus first just so that we don't lose it to net damage or some kind of surprise out of R&D. After we modded the Magnum Opus, we're going to click the Opus one time before we run R&D, just so that we have at least 4 credits in the case that we were to see an NAPD contract. We access a pup, nothing we can do about that. Last click I'm going to run HQ, since we're pretty sure it's just an end the run piece of ice, and we want to get him to spend some credits defending the Caprice and Jackson Howard that we saw in his hand. After we bump into this quandary, we're going to pass the turn to our opponent. He's going to thoroughly defend everything here, starting by icing up R&D, then Archives, and then he's going to put the Caprice behind R&D. I'm usually in favor of running R&D a lot, but since we know he has Architect and Caprice, it's probably not worth it. I'm going to spend the first couple clicks drawing some cards. We're going to draw Sneakdoor, and then we're going to draw Personal Workshop. Both pretty good draws here. I'm going to put the workshop down and then host our HQ interface on it. Our opponent's going to first click for a credit, then install a new remote, and defend that remote with a piece of ice. He's going to res the remote and its sundew. So we know that he drew the sundew and that the remote piece of ice is wraparound. We'd like to see some solutions to his ice, so first I'm going to draw a card. I don't want to reveal this SMC, and we really need some credits, so I'm just going to get 6 with Magnum Opus. Our opponent installs Jackson Howard and then uses his draw ability twice. It's essential that we deal with this sundew, so I'm going to play our SMC and then run HQ to just bounce off the quandary and deal with the RP ability. Then I'm going to run the sundew. As expected, our opponent reses wraparound. We're going to use SMC to go get David and break the wraparound for free, and then we're going to trash the sundew. Since we have 3 left, we might as well run Jackson Howard and force the issue with him. Our opponent's just going to let us access and trash the Howard. Our opponent installs a card in his remote and then advances it, and he's going to put an upgrade there as well. That's pretty much gotta be an NAPD contract. I don't think he'd just run a Nisei Mark II out like that, so I think we're just going to ignore that remote and let him score it, and then set up for a good sneak door on the following turn. So I'm just going to get 8. As expected, our opponent's going to score NAPD contract on his turn. We get to install HQ interface for free, and that's going to set us up nicely for this sneak door play. Pretty sure that it's pup on Archives, so we're going to have to be able to pay to install the sneak door, pay for pup, and then we're still going to want to have 4 left in case we access an NAPD contract. So I'm going to go click for 2, install sneak door, and then use sneak door, click 3. Our opponent reses pup, We pay to get through, and then we're going to get to access 2 cards. The first card is NAPD Contract, and it's a good thing that we clicked to make sure that we'd have 4 in this situation so we can score it. The second card is Jackson, and we can't do anything about that. Well, that was a pretty successful sneak door, so I don't really see any point of using it again, especially since we're broke, so I'm just going to use Magnum Opus to get us a couple credits. Our opponent's going to install and use Jackson Howard for his first 2 clicks, and then play a hedge fund for his last click. I don't think we want to rush to get rid of the Sneakdoor Beta. It's nice to have it around as a threat for the next few turns, so I think for now we just want to focus on developing our game and getting a few more cards in our hand and a few more credits. Click 1, I'm going to draw, and we get Stimhack. This is nice and will be useful for attacking his servers later. Click 2, we're going to draw again, and we see Diesel. It's tempting to play the Diesel here, but I think we want to make sure that we have some credits so we can continuously apply pressure on the Corp, so I'm just going to use Magnum Opus twice at the end of our turn. Our opponent uses Jackson Howard, and then plays down 2 new remote servers. These new servers are almost certainly asset economy of some sort, so for now I'm just going to stick with our plan of developing our hand and getting some more credits. Click 1, I'm going to play Diesel. We get a pretty good mix of cards here. All 3 of these are going to have some use, and we didn't really draw anything dead. We'd like to get into HQ again before that window closes, and I'd like to host the Gordian Blade down first on our personal workshop, just to avoid taking damage out of HQ and losing this valuable Icebreaker. Click 3, I'm going to Sneak Door, and after we pay through the pup, we're going to get 2 cards. We see Ashigaru, can't do anything about that, good to know though, and then we get a mental health clinic, and we're going to trash that. I generally like to trash the asset economy if we access it in either HQ or R&D. This is just a lot easier than dealing with it again later when it's on a remote server. Since we're probably too poor to trash any newly played asset economy cards, we're going to have to just use Magnum Opus, click 4. Our opponent reses 2 mental health clinics, and now we've seen that our opponent has drawn all 3 of this asset economy card throughout the game so far. Our opponent uses Jackson Howard first click, and then he defends both R&D and HQ with a new piece of ice. Because of the early Architect and Caprice, we've been really passive on R&D this game, but now I think we have the tools to change that. Click 1, I'm going to scavenge our Sneakdoor Beta into our self-modifying code. This is going to let us Stimhack R&D and be able to develop our Icebreaker setup with the Stimhack credits. Our opponent reses the first piece of ice, and it's Excalibur. We could hypothetically get Femme Fatale here to bypass Excalibur, but that's going to use all of our credits and not going to make it easy for us to get into R&D later. So I think we're better off just letting the Excalibur fire, continuing, and then running into what we assume is Architect. Our opponent chooses to res the Architect, so we're going to use SMC to go get the Mimic. Our opponent's then going to take his opportunity to res stuff, to res the Caprice. This is going to prompt us to spend a couple of our Stimhack credits on Gordian Blade, because we don't want to continue and have Caprice end the run and then lose those credits. After we break the Architect, we're going to have to play the Psy game. We're using real credits here. I didn't want to save some of the Stimhack credits to kind of give away what we're doing. I'm actually just going to spend 0 here because our opponent's pretty broke, and if he spends some more credits on the Caprice Psy game, I think that's going to be in our benefit anyway. Keep in mind that the main objective of this Stimhack play was economic development, so as long as we made our opponent spend a lot of credits and we got stuff in play and set up our game, we're okay with the run getting ended here. Well, unfortunately, our opponent spent 1 to our 0, so the run is going to end. We lose our feedback filter to the brain damage, and we don't really care about that, that's fine. We have enough credits to run one of the mentals and trash it here, but I don't think we want to go down to no credits. I think I would rather just use Magnum Opus twice so that we have enough credits to break ice next turn, and we can continue to be more aggressive. Since our opponent's broke, he's just going to take 2 credits and then play a hedge fund on his turn. We get to install the Gordian for free, and I'm just going to run HQ on my first click. I think we're not too worried about hitting net damage effects, especially since we have Mimic and David in play. We can break pretty much any ice that's going to do net damage to us, so I just want to run HQ and try to make him res some more ice. He's going to res Tsurugi. So it's going to cost us 5 to get into HQ, and I think that's probably worth it. There's quite a few cards that we're going to be able to trash with the 2 credits that we have left, and since we already know that 2 NAPDs are gone, I don't think we're quite as worried about scoring that. Plus, if we hit a future perfect, we're still going to have 2 credits to play the side game properly, so I'm really not too worried about going down to 2 here. We're going to access Ashigaru again, and then Wall of Thorns. Both of these ice are big late game ice, probably going to be primarily used on remote servers. It's not very good to put Ashigaru as an outermost piece of ice on one of your central servers as RP, since they can just bump into it and then run your remotes with impunity. Since we've already ran a central and we have a bunch of clicks left, I think it's time to put some pressure on these remotes. We especially need to get rid of Jackson Howard because we can't have our opponent drawing any more cards. I'm going to Mopus up to 4 on click 2, and then I'm going to run Jackson Howard click 3. We can break through the wraparound with David for free, and that's going to force our opponent to use the Jackson Howard. He puts back the Jackson that we trashed earlier, a celebrity gift, and a mystery card. We access the other card, and it's Caprice, and we're going to happily trash her for 1. Since we still have enough credits, last click I'm just going to run and trash one of the mental health clinics. We're pretty happy to see our opponent just get 3 credits on his turn. This is going to let us catch back up to him in credits with the Magnum Opus on our turn. It's only 2 to get into R&D if we just let the Excalibur go off, so I'm just going to click Magnum Opus 3 times and then run R&D. So we have another side game against Caprice here, and I think our opponent's probably going to assume that we're going to spend 0 because we only have 4 left, and if we were to win the side game, we'd want to be able to score an NAPD contract out of the deck. So I'm actually going to spend 1 since I think our opponent will spend some number of credits. We get lucky and our opponent also spent 1, so we're definitely going to be trashing Caprice. Let's first access the card out of R&D. We access Pup and we can't do anything about that, then we're going to trash the Caprice. Our opponent ices up the mental health clinic and then just takes 2 more credits. We've kind of hit a lull here, so I'm just going to keep drawing cards and developing our board. We draw a card, it's test run, draw again, and it's same old thing. We might as well install that same old thing, and then I'm just going to use Magnum Opus. Our opponent installs a piece of ice in front of his wraparound, and then he's going to click for 2 credits. If I were him, I would have put one of those big barriers in front of the wraparound. I'm assuming that he knows that we're playing Lady as our primary barrier breaker, and one of the weaknesses of Lady is that you can only use it 4 times. Ashigaru and Wall of Thorns are both pretty good for depleting the counters on it, and if he just stacks a bunch of barriers on one remote, it could be pretty hard for us to get in. Since R&D is still really cheap, I think I'm just going to take 6 credits with Magnum Opus and then run R&D last click. We access Eli 1.0 and there's nothing we can do about that, though it's worth noting that this fits into the barrier defense plan on the remotes that I was just talking about. Our opponent just clicks for 2 credits and then installs a piece of ice on that same remote. Our opponent's pretty clearly trying to score here, and the way that he played the Caprices early in their game is going to make it difficult for him to score without making a monster server with a lot of ice. I'd say our 2 main choices here are to set up to attack the remote, or to run HQ and try to intercept his agenda. I think the HQ plan is a little bit better, because if he draws Ash or Caprice or something like that, it's going to be really difficult to get into the remote. I'm going to click Magnum Opus twice and then run HQ. After we break everything for 5, we access 2 cards, the first of which is the Future Perfect. We'd really like to spend 0 here, because then we can run HQ again, break everything, and then we still have 2 credits to play the side game if we were to run into Future Perfect again. Of course, our opponent might have the same line of reasoning and assume that we are going to spend 0. Well, I'm going to bite the bullet and just spend 0. Our opponent spends 1, unfortunately, and we don't get to steal the Future Perfect. We access the second card, and it's the Wall of Thorns. Accessing the Wall of Thorns confirms that he probably didn't play one on the big remote, and that also makes me think that the Ashigaru is for sure there on the big remote, assuming we're right about the barrier thing. I'm going to take another stab at the Future Perfect and run and break HQ last click. We access Lotus Field and then Wall of Thorns, both blanks. Our opponent plays green level clearance, installs a new card in that big remote, and then advances the card. Well, this is a little frustrating. That's presumably not future perfect since he only advanced it one time. So that means he either drew an agenda or had two when we were double accessing on HQ. We have a pretty big decision to make here. I don't think we can get into the remote. We have to test run for a breaker, and it's either got to be Lady or Femme Fatale. The problem with Lady is that if it is Ashigaru and Eli as we're predicting, we're not going to have enough Lady counters to break everything. Ashigaru's got 5 subroutines, and then with Wraparound and Eli, that's going to be a total of 5 counters we're going to need to get into the server. This is what I was worried about earlier. If we fem the thing that we think is Ashigaru, then we're going to be victim to the outermost piece of ice. If it's Eli like we think it is, we're not going to have enough clicks left to click through the Eli, since we have to click for credits, play test run a central server, and then run the remote. Since we're pretty sure that the future perfect is still in HQ, I think it's worth taking a kind of desperate swing at it, so I'm just going to Stimhack HQ. After breaking everything with the Stimhack credits, we get to access 2 cards. The first one is Lotus Field, and the second one is the Future Perfect. Assuming we run his remote click 2, and he reses the Eli that we think he has there, we could click through and force him to res the next piece of ice, what we're assuming is Ashigaru. If all this stuff happens, he's going to be down to 2 credits. That's going to be exactly what he needs to drip back up to 3 at the beginning of his turn, and then score his 4 for 2 agenda. So in other words, if he spends 1 or more credits on this side game, he won't be able to score the agenda next turn, assuming that we're correct about the 2 pieces of ice on his remote server. Keep in mind that if we click through the Eli and he doesn't res the Ashigaru, we'd be able to break the wraparound with our David. I'm going to spend 0, hoping that he also spends 0 for this reason. Well, we luck out and our opponent does spend 0. This is a big victory for us stealing this future perfect. After we lose test run to brain damage, I'm going to run the remote and force him to res some of that ice. As expected, he reses Eli, and we have a decision to either click through to try to make him res the next piece of ice, or to just bounce off the Eli so we can preserve our last 2 clicks. Well, we already figured that if I get through the Eli, he's still going to be able to score the agenda after resing the next piece of ice. So I think instead of clicking through, I'm just going to bounce off, get 2 credits with Magnum, and then run R&D. We access Enhanced Login Protocol and aren't very happy to see this. As expected, our opponent scores the agenda on his turn, and unfortunately, it's Nisei Mark II. Things are just going to get worse for us from here. We really need to score this last agenda ASAP. I'm just going to get 6 and then run R&D and hope to see the winning agenda. We access Lotus Field, and that's not too exciting. Our opponent plays Jackson Howard and then uses Jackson Howard's draw ability. Last click, he's going to play the dreaded Enhanced Login Protocol. Since he just discarded a card, I think I'm going to use Magnum Opus and then run Archives. I don't really want Jackson Howard just sitting around, and even though it costs us 2 clicks to run Archives, I think it's worth it to try to force the issue with Jackson. Well, it works, and our opponent is going to use Jackson Howard to shuffle in Caprice, Hedge Fund, and a mystery face-down card. Last click, I'm going to run R&D, and after breaking, we access Pup. Our opponent uses his first 2 clicks to play Celebrity Gift, and we see a big hand of tons of ice. Last click, he's going to reinforce R&D with one of those ice. My pick is that it's either Wall of Thorns or Pup, since it's not very good to have a end the run outermost piece of ice as RP. We really need to get access to more breakers and just have more stuff going, so I'm going to draw some cards here. We draw Clone Chip, then we draw R&D Interface, which I'm just going to host on the personal workshop, and then I'm going to use Magnum Opus last click. Our opponent draws 2 cards, and then places another piece of ice on R&D. We need to find these other breakers and get some stuff going fast. We're quickly getting closed out of this game. I'm going to draw a card and its HQ interface, draw another card and its Magnum Opus. Then I'm just going to put the clone chip on Personal Workshop and use Magnum Opus once. Our opponent draws a card, plays Hedge Fund, and then reinforces his monster remote. I'm going to host the HQ interface, then I'm going to run R&D. I'd really like to get him to spend some credits on R&D so that he won't have as many credits to res the ice on his remote. He reses Toll Booth, and we're going to be able to get through this with David after we lose 3 credits. Then he reses Lotus Field, and I think I'm just going to bump into this and let the run end. I don't really want to spend all of our credits to get into R&D, especially since I'm worried about him setting up a scoring situation in the next couple turns. Last click, I'm just going to draw another card, and we get SMC. Our opponent plays a new remote, then clicks for 2 credits. He's going to res the new remote, and it's Sundew. But we don't really care about that. We really just need to find breakers and be able to attack if he goes to score that last agenda. So I'm going to draw a card, and we get Maker's Eye. Draw another card, and we get Lady. That's what we're looking for. I'm going to host that on the Personal Workshop, and then just use Magnum Opus once. Our opponent draws 2 more cards, and then installs a card in his monster remote. Well, I think pretty much no matter what, we've got to run that remote thing. If we don't put pressure on the remote, Nisei Mark II is going to just completely lock us out. So I think our plan this turn has to involve attacking that remote. Clicks 1 and 2, I'm going to bump into the toll booth, but I don't want to lose the 3 credits to the toll booth, so I'm going to spend 5 on my Personal Workshop to install Lady over David, and then also install the R&D interface. Our run is ended, and click 3, I'm just going to use Magnum Opus. Click 4, I'm going to run that remote. He reses another Eli. We're going to break that for 1. We'll break the second Eli for 1 as well. He doesn't res the next ice, and then we get to break the wraparound for free. Our opponent's then going to use the Nisei counter to end our run. Our opponent thinks for quite a while here, then he takes a credit and advances the card in the remote twice. Well, it's do or die here. First of all, I'm going to install SMC over the Lady and the Magnum Opus. This is so that we can use the clone chip to get back the Lady mid-run. Click 2, I'm going to play Maker's Eye, just so that we can avoid enhanced login protocol costing us an extra click. The Maker's Eye is just going to run into Toll Booth, and our run is going to end. Now for clicks 3 and 4, we're able to use Same Old Thing to Stimhack his remote. This is going to let us clone chip back the Lady, break all of his stuff, and unfortunately for our opponent, that's going to score us the winning agenda. Well, that's going to do it for my Chaos Theory game overview. That was a very close game, and I think it had a lot of technical plays on both sides, and I felt like it really showcased what this deck is capable of. I think we got a little lucky with our draws. We saw a lot of things right when we needed them, and we had plenty of access to Stimhack throughout the course of the game. And it seems that our opponent was having a lot of trouble getting Ash or Caprice to stick. I think that's mainly, though, from the way that he played the 2 Caprices he had in the early game. And I definitely don't think our opponent made a terrible play there at the end trying to force that agenda through. I think it's really hard to have been able to predict what we were capable of there, especially that Maker's Eye play to avoid enhanced login protocol. Well, I hope you found some insight here, and I hope that you liked this video. If you did, please click subscribe and the button that looks like a thumbs up, and I'll see you again for some more Netrunner stuff.